Public opinion is important to every industry and is getting more and more important for ranching and agriculture. Sometimes poor views come from bad practices that bring those ideas onto themselves. Others come from poor perspectives brought on through other means. Today, we discuss bad practices and ranching misnomers. Welcome to Hashknife Hangouts. I'm Calen. Brandon is my co-host, father, and partner in crime. Please like, comment, and subscribe. If you can find us at the social media handles, go ahead. They're down below. For those returning, thank you for supporting us. And now to today's notes, bad practices and agricultural misnomers. We're going to start with bad practices because honestly, I think bad practices a lot of the times bring on the misnomers that a lot of people see. So a lot of people say things like, ranchers don't care about animals or they're uneducated and things like that. But what often brings those on? The bad practices that ranchers, farmers, or anybody else within agriculture does. So I've got about 6 different things here. We're going to go over them. I'm going to spiel them out real quick. Dad will give his take. We'll talk about them. Then I'll give out my spiel on the misnomers. Dad will talk about them, give his take, and we'll discuss, and then we'll close this puppy out. So with that, some of the bad practices, the first one that I had, maybe running everything just into the ground where it goes from grass and luscious fields to suddenly dirt. Another one might be not maintaining fences and you end up enabling the escape of some of your livestock and the animals. Not paying attention to injuries of animals, so it looks like you're neglecting them. Too many animals, not enough grass, feed, or simply room in terms of acreage. Goes back to my point before at the very beginning, you run everything into the ground. The fifth one is the improper care in pens or the poor animal husbandry of your livestock. A lot of this, again, you might be thinking, well, this is all some of the same stuff you've already said before. No, not quite. It's a nuanced change, but it's very much related. And then the last part being a lack of safety and precautions. And oftentimes it gets others in predicaments. We've talked about safety for not only livestock, but also the humans who are working the livestock as well. So with that, those are just bad practices that I have seen. Maybe there's some others out there. Maybe Dad has some others that he can bring to light, but those are some top 6 that I thought off the top of my head, along with some research that I wanted to share and I thought were some things that were highlights that should be kind of called out in a sense so that people kind of understood that we don't support them and those are not the way in which farmers and ranchers should be taking care of their livestock or the ground in which they work.
Well, and yeah, there's some reality to that too. Everybody, I think, even the untrained eye can see when a cow is starving or they're
Right.
way too thin, right? I mean, you can see that. And so the the cause of that can be something different too. She might be standing belly deep in grass and, have a calf that's, depending on what age it is or how chronologically how old it is, whether it's 2 weeks old or 4 months old, you can kind of take a look at that calf too and see how well is it doing. But you don't necessarily know the cause of that. That cow might be old and got no teeth left in her head.
Right.
Or she, may have hardware disease. She may have, cows are notorious for picking stuff up and chewing on it, and so she may have picked up a little chunk of wire that was somehow, bounced out of a vehicle or, wasn't picked up along a fence line, something like that. And she consumed that. And now she's got a tear or an interruption in one of her stomachs, and it's caused pain and she can't eat. There's any number of things, or she just may not have enough to eat. And so, you can make assumptions on things. And I think a lot of times people do without knowing really what the issue is. And you can kind of guess if she's standing with a lot of good grass and it's good quality grass, then I can say, maybe she's old, maybe she's got an injury. You got to see how somebody is taking care of that. Maybe she's got an injury or an animal does have an injury and they're not taken care of. That's another issue too.
Right.
Animal can have an injury and you just haven't seen it yet. It may be a couple of days old or a week old. You haven't been out, and actually laid eyes on that animal, even though maybe you've been riding through them or something, but have missed it or, didn't see them somewhere in a pasture, didn't run onto them. And then all of a sudden you see something, you go, ooh, wow, how long's that been like that? You got, say wire cut or wire caught around a hind leg or something. They haven't shaken it off and it's swollen, and maybe it's interrupted the skin and you got some drainage there. You're like, oh crap. Now it's your responsibility to do it. It's you ethically and for the good of the animal, you need to take care of that. There may be some that don't. And that's, when somebody sees that, they can assume that, oh man, they're not taking care of that. Or I would assume first, well, maybe they don't know about it. And if that's the case, I see something like that. Hey, I let them know. I say, hey, you got a heifer or a cow or bull, steer, whatever it is. I noticed it just happened to be going by and saw that they had something wrapped around a hind leg. You probably didn't know that. And they're like, oh God, no, thanks. I mean, we've had that happen.
Right.
So don't assume, and you can't assume. And that's the problem, that everybody those who know the least about an industry seem to have the most expertise sometimes when they're talking about it. Doesn't matter what it is. So there's that part of that as well. So it's not knowing or not assuming, and you just shouldn't assume something. I was surprised the very first time I ever saw some calves, and I saw like 2 calves in a pasture here, close, and they were like week-old calves in the end of September. And I'm like, whoa, somebody got a bull got out, or a fence, something happened, and then pretty soon more calves and more calves, and I'm like, okay.
No,
I'd never
the
seen
trend. So they did this on purpose.
Right. I'd never seen fall calving. It was the first time I'd ever seen fall calving, years ago, because nobody did it then. It just wasn't the way, and now it's getting to be a lot of people doing that as a different way to manage their animals. So they're not calving in January, February, which we don't either. We wait till, March when the weather's a little better. But some people are like, no, this is perfect. Stick those bulls with those cows in January, February, and boom, September, you got calves. Or October, so it's just a different way of doing it. And at first I assumed, man, somebody got exposed to a bull they shouldn't have, and was not the case at all. So, and that's, that we're in the industry, about that, but this is of course years ago, but before it ever got started,
Well,
or was really started here.
And some of the things you're talking about are practices that they may not pertain to our ranch or our region too. So we've discussed this before. Is I've seen people on social media who they are calving in December and January, and I'm like, why would you do that? But they're in Texas, and suddenly you're like, oh, that's why. That completely makes sense, because I even asked them, why are you doing it now? That makes no sense to me. He's like, well, this is the coolest time of year, and for them, they're not fighting the cold weather like we are. They are fighting the heat. So it's less stress on their animals. So they are purposely trying to calve them in the middle of winter so that it is the coolest possible time. So it's less stress on everybody. I'm like, oh, okay. Now that makes sense. But
well, and you think about what that does is for a food chain.
Right.
It's a good thing.
Keeps everything filled up all year long.
Absolutely. Yeah. You don't have big gluts on that where you can't process animals. You've got the ability to kind of modulate the volume and keep a good food supply going all the time.
Now we'll start with bad practices. Like I kind of opened up with, the first one will be kind of running everything into the ground. We've got a lease that we've been working on for a few years. There's been a lot of additions and improvements that you and Mom and Braden have made. I have assisted with a couple small things when I've come home on leave, but it's always been you guys just fixing fences, getting either perimeter fences rebuilt or fixed up, or creating an ad hoc, somewhat workable corral system so that you can work the cows into a trailer and take them off either back to the main place or to ship them off in the fall to get sold for the market, like we discuss every fall in the October time range. What are some examples of how you have seen others just kind of run everything, like I've said, into the ground, where it goes from luscious grass or workable ground to suddenly you look one day and it goes from a pasture to it's just plain dirt?
Well, and yeah, that's kind of weather dependent too.
Yeah.
some people do that with their own place. Like right now, ours is looking pretty tough because of the grasshopper and drought situation we had this last year.
Right.
And I was like, oh man, I'm hoping for some rain, you know. And we're starting to get a little bit of moisture, but we got to have a lot of good moisture. It all, you know, depends on the integrity of the person who's got the lease or doing the lease. If you want to have a relationship with somebody, you follow the lease. You don't vary from that, and you talk to each other and say, hey, we could either take a few more cows, or, you know, a couple of years ago, and I never even told them, you know, it was better for me to start feeding these cows at home than to run out there and feed them on their place where it was covered with, you know, 15 inches of snow. So I pulled them off there 2 weeks early. Like, no big
Right.
deal. I mean, they weren't going to graze the grass anyway. They're going to make some, you know, some impact around the water holes and stuff, but, you know, you just do it. I always want to err that direction than to overdo your lease. I mean, that's just wrong. But there are people that say you've got a restricted number of animals and a certain dates that you can run between. um, they will pile more animals in there and they'll take their time getting them off. They're always busy. You know,
Right.
it's not a priority because they're not having to feed them or use their pasture or use up their pasture. And I mean, you see it happen. It's just human nature that happens everywhere.
Well,
So,
and I should also add in there, it's not just leases. I use the lease as an example because for us, it was a personal thing. But there's
right.
some people that even the ground they own, they still run it into the dirt, and it
Yeah.
amazes us that they would do that. But that's not something that's necessarily condoned or anything like that. Like we definitely recommend take care, because we have said this before. Take care of the ground because the ground takes care of
Right.
you.
Well, and if you looked right now at us, at our place, the way the drought and the grasshoppers were, you go, man, those guys got those cows on there, way, way too many cows on that piece of ground. Well,
Right.
not really. It's just what's happened with it. But what we've had to do is then supplement more hay for a
Hmm.
longer time to make up for that. So, you know, we'll be business as usual. But if we have another year like we've had this year, you know, we're going to be forced to make it easier on the ground by having to sell a bunch of cows off. You know, we did that
Right.
last year, but we'll, you know, have to do it again, call deeper one more time, and hopefully that doesn't happen.
The next point is the failure as a bad practice, the failure of many to not maintain their fences. And like I said before, it actually it enables the escape of livestock, whether that's horses, whether that's cows, whether that's sheep, or maybe even hogs. Like the when people they just kind of if this is we try to make this as family friendly as possible. If they half-ass their shit, like like it just ends up becoming,
Yeah.
but frankly a shit show. I mean, everything's just kind of thrown together. It's super glued. There might be duct tape and baling wire
Or
putting
nothing done.
or nothing, and it's just falling apart, and animals are just getting loose, and you're constantly calling the neighbor being like, hey, can you come get your bull, or can you come get your cows, or your horses are out again. Like that is another bad practice that I think kind of brings the things that we'll talk about later, those misnomers, onto the agricultural community.
Well, and yeah, and you don't want to be a bad neighbor. I mean, we've had a couple of years where, you know, I've put heifers, the guy who runs heifers in the wintertime next to us, and it's like stubble fields. He leases that ground.
Yeah.
And I 2 or 3 times I was picking these heifers up and sending them back over there. And he didn't know about it. I was like, what's the point of telling him? Because he lives a ways away. Until it happened again this fall. He saw one in on us. He just happened to be coming by or checking on him. And he called me and I said, yeah, you can pick it up, get it, make him do the work.
Yeah.
And I've had to do that where I've got, especially a bull, you want to try to get that bull out of there as soon as possible, especially one bull here year before last. It had 4 different brands on it. It was a leased bull, and it looked like, and then there's something else too. You can have a pretty good fence or reasonably good fences for most standards, but if you got a fence crawler, it's tough to hold one of those things. And
Right.
once they learn how to get through a fence, it's tough to hold them. And we had this one on us. The ground was leased on the other side of the fence. They were running that, and that bull, we saw this black bull in us. I'm like, great. So we went up there and got up to it, and man, it turned around and it walked to the fence, stuck its head down, picked it up, put a foot through, and then another foot, and then just walked. And I was like, this guy's an expert. He went
Yeah.
through there faster than I could.
He was a professional.
Yeah, he's professional
Yeah.
because he stopped and took his time and placed his head through, and then his legs. And I got a hold of them and says, hey, this bull keeps crawling in here. I'll be happy if we can work together. I'll help you work on this fence.
Yeah.
Nope, they
Nothing.
weren't about
Yeah.
to do nothing. They were gonna they moved the cattle off of there until we had the cows out, so they didn't have to do any fencing because it's a lease.
Right.
Again, it's they're not going to put any money or time into it.
Well, and the other thing
So
too is on our end, we've had cows where I know you and Brayton personally witnessed a cow just straight jump over the
oh yeah,
fence one time,
right.
and she didn't last much longer.
No.
And that's not to say we killed her. We just took her, put her in the trailer, and we sold her in the ring about a week and a half later, and she was
Yep.
gone. She was no longer part of the herd because what happens is they end up teaching the others how to do that, and that's a no-no.
Well, that and then tearing down your fences.
Right.
And it was a yearling heifer, and I'm kind of leaning towards that she was probably not fertile anyway. I mean, kind of seems like some of those that are kind of ringy like that, they have
Yeah.
something going on. Um, typically don't breed up, or a higher percentage of them don't breed up. I shouldn't say they all, because that's wouldn't be not a true statement. But yeah, and then when that happens, I want our bulls to stay home, and I don't want somebody else's bulls in us, and I sure don't want our cows out. And so, I mean, I'm watching constantly to see if we've got any animals that I'm missing. And it's not easy to do, but you're kind of taking a head count all the time, and you're looking at neighboring places like, okay, they've got all blacks. Is there a red over there? I mean, it's just common sense. And you can pick somebody's bull and get it into a corral and take it to their place and dump it out. It's done nothing for them. You say, hey, your bull was out, and they go, oh, okay, thanks for getting it back in, and they're back to business as normal. But if you make that their problem and make that a little bit painful, where they have to be responsible for it and they got to take the time to do it, and it happens more than once, they'll start fixing some fences typically to make that happen, or get that bull out of there, or get
Right.
rid of that bull. So I can do all of somebody else's work, and it'll just make more work later on. So it's better to hit that head on, say, hey, can't have that bull in here. And most people are really good about it. They really are. Some not necessarily, but I mean, this guy borders us, and I grew up with him, and he was like, oh crap, and he was like right on it. In fact, that bull was real close in that ad hoc corral you're talking about on that lease, and I put him in the corral. I was like, this is gonna make it easier for him, and it's he's right here. I'm not gonna make it tough on him to do it too, but I got to hold him and say, hey, a bull's in that corral for you. All you got to do is just pick him up, and that
Right.
worked out. But you're trying to be halfway neighborly about it, and he's
Right.
very good about it. And you can't control your animals all the time, and he's got a lot of ground, and I don't think he has a lot of help, so his fences sometimes don't get the attention they should have, and that happens as well. And then you get an animal that crawls, that's the recipe for it. But he went through this particular bull went through two fences to get to where he thought he needed to be, and he didn't need to be there.
Another thing is not paying attention to injuries. So this is where I think you brought up a really good point. A lot of the times
Of
you go
course I did.
out, you check. Thanks. You go out and you check your animals every day, but you just might not see something.
Right.
And then finally, when you do, the the responsible thing is to address it immediately and to take care of it. However, when people see that an animal has maybe an injury or something going on with it that has not been attended to in a large time span. A couple of days, people are typically pretty understanding, like, oh, they just haven't seen it yet. Or maybe they'll call and say, hey, I saw this on your animal, you might want to check it. But when it's been a week or longer, that's when a lot of the times people will start getting concerned, and this is where negligence and just improper care of an animal is. Can you kind of share some of that piece of just plain not paying attention to injuries and not taking care of it properly?
Oh, I mean, I know people that just turn cows out and they don't go looking at them again.
Yeah,
And
that's
it's like,
weird. That's so
oh,
odd to me. I don't
yeah,
understand
I
how you
mean, it
can do
happens.
that.
It happens, but
Uh,
I mean, and maybe it's just me being too much of a control freak. I
yeah.
want to know what those animals are and what they're doing. And typically if somebody sees an injury on something, an injury's probably been there a while, because they're seeing it from the road,
Right.
because they're not going through your pastures.
Right.
And they might see something along the road that it borders, or at a water hole that's close to the road. And if they're doing that and seeing that, that's awesome. I mean, I want to know about that, because I may not have seen it, or so I can tell them, yeah, I'm working on that, watching that, and they've gotten some care. We're trying to get them to heal up, but we're keeping an eye on them and checking them every couple of days at that point. And you may have to bring them in closer to a set of corrals and a small pasture off your corrals and put them in there, keep them up a little closer with some other animals so that they have a little bit less anxiety, but you're able to bring them in and work on them too. And those are always problematic. We've talked about that. Another one, the cattle handling, where
Right.
yeah, working on an injury, I don't want that to happen again.
Right.
So it's
Well,
tough to get them in.
I mean that it also goes to the improper care in pens
Mhm.
specifically. So we're talking you referenced last episode, which was cattle handling, using the pens to your advantage. You're not causing problems, but then there's also the things where a lot of the times people associate it with maybe dairy cattle. They have a lot of the times they have indoor pens or indoor stalls. It's typically a cement flooring or something to that manner.
At least
And
covered. A lot of times there's, some of those big ones
right.
in the Midwest are covered.
Right. But the thing is, I think what people a lot of the times will get hung up on is the dirtiness of the floors. And if it's not
Oh,
regularly cleaned out and replaced with, I don't know, sawdust or fresh dirt or gravel or something to that effect, there are issues. And I completely agree with it. It goes with your horses or cattle. That's also part of the reason why you don't have the cows calve within the pens typically or the corrals. It's because of naval infection potential. We'll normally have them calve and with the horses full out in the pasture. So they have a clean birthing area and they go straight onto the grass or the dirt. And it's not the really it's the dirty
it's the manure,
manure filled
right?
kind of sewage type dirt, which we do clean out regularly once to two times a year based off of our animal flow and the amount of animals we have. If we had more, we'd probably do it more often, but that's all that's adequate for our location. But there's some people that just they won't clean those locations in for their animals, their pens or anything like that. And I think those bad practices create again the things I keep referencing the thing that we're going to talk about in a little bit, but the misnomers of the that we just don't care about our animals, we don't care about the hygiene or the health of the animals, and that's something that I think people need to be more cognizant of because it's not only something that's actually important to the animals and eventually the consumers, but it's also something that it's an eyesore and it's very clear to people from the outside that wow, this person just doesn't care about their livestock. Why should we really support them?
Well, that's right. I mean, it makes the industry look bad,
Right.
and and you may have one or two bad actors. Again, you don't necessarily know what their story is or what's going on, but when it's habitual, that's a pattern. So um, calving is really important, obviously, but I do want those animals out. I want the foals out when they hit the ground. I want them to be away from a set of corrals so that you don't have to intervene and be doing preventative things for infection on a navel.
Right.
I mean, that's like
I mean,
that
that's more
umbilical
that's
cord.
more energy on your part anyway.
It's like, well, if you're doing that, then conditions aren't quite what they should be anyway.
Right.
Not that you're just ignoring them because you're watching them close, but you've got them out there away from the corrals. Now, the one exception to that is our heifers when we calve. I do have them in the pen,
Right.
but we're putting down either chips or straw, something clean every year, keeping it clean and trying to minimize any infection. But when those calves, when they do calve, then we're dipping those navels in some iodine solution and getting them out into that pasture as quick as we can after they've successfully nursed, and we know that heifer is going to take that calf and not abandon it. Then boy, it goes out, it's gone. Those calves don't know any different whether they're born to an older cow or to a heifer.
Yeah.
So
Well,
they're
and
tough. They'll make it.
I think the point now I'm starting to kind of see something here. I finally epiphany, light bulb moment is a lot of this is coming from pure laziness, right? Like it's maximizing the amount of effort that you can do. And that's where it comes into running everything into the ground because I'm just not doing anything because I'm just letting the animals do their own thing and I'm not managing the herd. I'm not maintaining
Yeah,
fences and it's falling apart. I'm not taking care of injuries because I'm not going out and checking these animals or I'm just not doing the work that I should. And for this particularly, I'm not going out and moving cattle or letting the cows and horses go out to the pens because I don't want to have to move them, or maybe I just don't want to provide a safe area, like you said, with wood chips or something for them. And by the lack of effort on the front end, it could potentially, in terms of safety for the animal, with the, taking care of that umbilical cord, and making sure the navel's uh, uh, properly cared after, it's actually making more work on the back end. So my laziness up front is actually causing more problems in the back. Whereas not only could I have prevented it, but now it's creating this bad practice and this bad image of the industry that I could have prevented from the very beginning had I just put forth just that little bit of effort.
or lost entirely.
Yeah,
Could be that,
absolutely.
so, and sometimes it isn't necessary. I think there could be, that's a good factor. It's a good point about somebody just being a little bit lazy, or, not caring about it as
Yeah,
much. There's also the possibility that, it's expensive to do this, and maybe they don't have the resources or the money to put into some better corrals, or fences, or the money that they've done, that's not their priority. They've put that somewhere else. So, there's a possibility where they're doing just fine, but you know what? These corrals were good enough for my grandpa. They're good enough for me.
yeah,
I mean, there is that too. Or, you know what? I'm only going to do this a couple more years. I'm not putting a bunch of time and effort and money into something that I don't care about anymore. There's
right.
all kinds of different reasons why, but your point of it looking like an issue for an industry, doesn't matter what the reasons for them not doing something. The perspective from someone on the outside is still the same. Doesn't matter. So, um, you kind of want to carry that on, that we're decent stewards of what we do.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's
I mean,
it.
especially when we
And
have a social media and a YouTube presence, it's small but growing, but that we are a face of the agricultural community, and we're trying to portray that the best way possible. And like you said, we're stewards of the industry. If we're not doing it the right way, then how do we expect other people to, maybe those who are interested in becoming first time farmers or first time ranchers, they see us and go, oh, that's the right way to do it, and they follow us, and then they just end up looking like jackasses, or worse, they result in the death of themselves or somebody else because of an improper way of doing something.
well, or where they're at doesn't work for them. Like,
Right.
in Texas versus
Right.
here, we wouldn't calve in December.
No. No.
I mean, that's a lot of winter to have to go through to keep an
Yeah.
animal alive. So, anybody who's in the industry, you're a steward of the perception of that industry, whether you realize it or not, or
Yep.
whether you care or not. You really are. And so somebody going down the highway, and they look over and they see a bunch of cows that are starved down. That, what do you remember? Do you remember the
Right.
the ones that look really good and fat and they're out there grazing? That's the impression they get. So, and you're right, so many things with social media, and there are folks that they don't think a cow should be anywhere, shouldn't be alive, that we're sucking up uh their oxygen, and producing nothing but methane. But nothing's it's not that simple. And so, there's politics that come into that as well, and what their personal preferences are, and everybody wants to try to influence everybody else. So
Yeah.
they'll take what, or cherry pick what is maybe one issue or one certain thing, and say, well, this is how everybody does this. And that's not true. That's not necessarily how things are. Or they see something that everybody does do, like castrate young bulls to make them steers. We do that. Most everybody does, unless you're in the seed stock industry where you're producing bulls. Um, they can spin that in a way that's like, oh my God, look what they do to these animals. Well, they do the same thing to dogs and cats.
I mean, technically they
So
do it to humans too. It's just a medical procedure.
could yeah, in certain reasons. But so that is a good practice, and a safe practice to do, but they view that as something entirely different. And one of the big deals is, the sport of rodeo, say how
Right.
that's abusive to animals, and it's not true. I mean, it's not. Some of those animals, I wouldn't mind being a rodeo bull.
Oh, I was gonna say, be a PBR or rodeo bull is pretty cushy life.
That's a nice life, and a nice long life. You're gonna
Yeah.
you're not gonna be hamburger anytime soon,
No.
because if you do a good job, then you got a whole lifetime after you're too old to buck hard. Uh, they're going to be collecting semen off you,
Oh
and
yeah.
for as long as you can last. So that's the perception there, and the misinformation that's spread by a lot of things, a lot of, again, political causes is something that we're always having to not only um, answer to, but to try to really be proactively guarding against.
Right.
And that's what we do, is we're trying to do this as an educational, hey, this is what we do. Take on any questions. And we may not be in the norm of what somebody else does in another part of the country, but we're happy to tell you why we do it. And you know what? We may learn something and along the way and be able to apply something that we haven't done before, haven't thought of.
Right.
What a neat way to learn.
Well, and that's I mean, that's why I like to bring up the Texas part, is I follow quite a few people from South and North Texas, and getting their perspective on things is completely different from not only themselves, because the breadth of Texas, north and south wise,
Mhm.
but then also just because there's such a difference between Texas and Montana, and having that difference there too. Um, I'm gonna move on to misnomers, and there's 9 different things that I wanted to cover. I'm going to list them real quick and we'll go over. These were, again, things that I thought of, things I kind of referenced from other locations, just quick Googles, some surveys I put on Twitter, believe it or not. And this is kind of what I found out was a lot of the top ones are, the first one, ranchers do not care about the animals or the land. 2, all cows are just there for production. There's no emotional attachment to them. Number 3, ranchers are uneducated and unskilled. 4, ranchers are poor businessmen. 5, ranchers are lazy or unorganized hicks. And I put hicks in there because there's a connotation there with that I think is important, that it goes with that concept. Number 6, large farms or ranches are always corporate. Number 7, ranching is always low tech. Number 8, ranchers abuse animals and do not care about them, kind of back to number 2, where there's no emotional attachment. And then the final one, number 9, ranchers hate / do not care about the environment. So we'll start with number 1, unless there's one that really popped out to you out of all those. The first one being ranchers don't care about the animals or the land.
Well, that goes right in with your very last one. They don't care about the
Yeah.
environment either. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't do this and continue to do it to stay sustainable by not caring.
Right.
You've got to manage it. And I don't know of anybody who doesn't try to manage their pasture. And you think about it in terms of pasture and animals. If you don't have the pasture, you're not going to have the animals. So you are managing the grass as well. I mean, that's ecology 101.
Yeah.
Um,
I would say
you got to have the
here's the
carrying
difference.
capacity.
The difference between the two, and I completely agree with you. We're talking carrying capacity, like you just said, with the animals to the land. For us, it's typically one cow calf pair, so one cow to its calf, mothered up, equals about 20 acres for coverage, is roughly how we equate that.
For years production.
Um,
Yeah, correct.
that way we're not overtaxing the land, but we're also getting enough production or enough feed to the animal so it can produce a very healthy bouncing baby boy or girl and send it off to the ring, and then ultimately the feeders who then butcher it and sell it to the consumers. I think
Really, you're trying to maximize the number without
right,
hurting the ground.
right. And I think there's a difference between that, and I know the verbiage is similar between that one and the last one, which is ranchers hate or do not care about the environment. I think that more or less ties toward things like um the the delisting or listing of wolves on the endangered species list. Things like the use of combustible engines and petroleum and oil-based products, sustainable type forms of energy, electric machinery. Do we have electric cars, electric farm? We've discussed all of those things,
Right.
but I think that's kind of where that's more headed, is the green side of ranching versus the taking care of and the operational side of the animals. I think they're similar, same, but different, because they do tie up very much together, but one is more operational versus one political and philosophical.
Well, and that's when you take a look at what is the one that has the most amount of contention.
Mm-hmm.
in those, whether you're taking care of the ground or whether you care about the environment. And it's the one that's the going on the environmental side of it. That seems to be the one who has the most opposition, the most
Right.
contentious viewpoint of what we try to do, because it's political in nature or philosophical in nature,
Right. No, I agree. I think to
because it doesn't have any necessarily have any basis. It's about a narrative,
or a
you know. It's
perception, and that's what a misnomer
yep,
is, right? It's that
yep.
perception. I think the important thing though is it's not that ranchers or farmers hate or don't care about the environment or have no stake in caring after the environment, but there are certain things like we've discussed before. It is currently not feasible to use electric machinery in ranching or farming. Maybe one day, but even then, there is still the use of burning coal to produce the energy to that item. Are you burning five five gallons of oil ultimately, or are you burning 5 gallons of coal? Like that in terms of equitable volumes for the resource that's being used. And until one can outperform the other with the lowest amount used, I think right now petroleum based products have the up and the step up on it, because like we've talked about,
Absolutely.
there's some electric cars and trucks that they just can't pull the weight that we need for cattle and horses, and they only have a 400-mile range before they need to be recharged for another 8 hours, versus I can just go to the gas station, fill up, and keep going for another 400. There's a
Well,
difference between hours and minutes.
at what temperature too?
Also, a good point. We've talked about
Well,
that too. Electric cars can get zapped by the energy of not having any heat.
right. And anybody who's lived in a northern climate
Yeah,
and you go out and your car won't start because it's too cold, that's pretty basic.
right. So okay, I'll kind of skip past those because I mean it did get a little political there, but I'm trying to make a point there. Those are the misnomers. It's not that we
Right.
don't hate or care about the environment. It's just that we are realists. I think is probably the best way to put things. Is we're realists. We still care about the land. We want to use operations to maximize things, but still care after it, and we're not here to rape and pillage, as one
Oh,
might say. We're here to be part of it and use it to its most beneficial capacity without causing any harm that we already have.
well, and I like to have a snoot full of fresh air and a
Yeah,
gulliga zipper full of clean water, and I
yeah,
want all our
absolutely.
animals to do the same. So why would you want to purposely uh, pollute that or make it unusable?
The other two, they again same but different, is number 2 and number 8. All cows are just there for production. There's no emotional attachment. And then the 8th one was ranchers abuse animals and do not care about them. I was thinking more along the lines of castration, branding,
Right.
vaccination in terms of abuse, maybe moving animals. We've talked about this. I think it was the last episode. The hot shots. We don't use them, but people do. There's a way to use them and a way not to use them for sure. Uh,
Well,
but what are your takes on on
yeah, let's
the
talk
emotional
about the
attachment?
abuse part. If
Yeah,
you're well, let's talk about the abuse part first. If you're gonna vaccinate an animal, you're sticking a needle under their hide.
yeah,
I mean, that's the way it is. If you're gonna brand them, you're marking them and creating a little piece of skin to peel off because of a little burn. I've got all kinds of those marks on me because of
well, and
different
I'd say
things that have happened.
people will argue it's different because you can, for animals it's not their choice. People will get tattoos and stuff like that. That's their
Mhm.
personal choice. However, the animals don't have that choice, and now that we have more technology, you can use freeze branding. You can use that nitrogen to make a white hair follicle mark rather
It's
than actually
still
burning the animal.
yeah, but it still disrupts the skin. So what's the difference? To me, I'm not worried about that so much, because that again, it's a perception. But
Yeah,
what you're looking at there when you do that in castration, the same, you may call out abuse, but what that is, it's a management practice.
right. I agree, because
You know,
there's other things too where, I mean, we do it with cats and dogs constantly, but then we do it to cows and horses, and suddenly it's abuse. Like, and now today, we actually we sedate the horses for
Mhm.
castration, and then the calves we found it's less stressful and more effective if we use really tight rubber bands
Yeah, we just
rather than
banned them like,
actual
yeah,
castration, which sucks for us because we can't get Rocky Mountain oysters or in
right.
other parts of the United States called calf fries, but we can't get those anymore. But it's less stress on the animal, and that's how we do it now. But it's still, like you said, it's managing the herd, just like the first people in the Western Hemisphere that started doing that, the Nez Perce Indians out of the Idaho and Washington area, which is crazy enough as it is. People who were considered primitive in a sense
Right.
versus where we're at today, they had that stuff figured out with obsidian blades before we ever did. So, like, riddle me that one, Batman.
Exactly. Well, and that to me, that's a management practice that you do. The emotional part of that is, I've seen grown men cry because they've had to take their cattle to sale.
Oh yeah.
You tell me, and not all of them, just a part of them. You tell me you don't have an emotional attachment to that. And I'll tell you what, it was hard for me this last fall, and your mother the same, to send these cows to town that still had some years with us that we didn't necessarily have to do, but we had to because of drought and no pasture and just the conditions that we're faced with. And it was hard, but I've seen guys I thought were tougher than me, tears rolling down their face because they were doing exactly the same thing. So there is emotion in this. Don't let anybody ever tell you there's not. I mean,
Well,
if they don't, I can't imagine that the level of caring, maybe on some level, that you have for an animal that can't care for itself always.
right.
There's some people that they take care of themselves, and it's like, okay, well, you don't want to see something bad happen to them, but you don't have that level of emotion where you are their caretaker, and we are their caretaker.
Well, and I would say the greatest example of all of that is Ears.
Oh yeah.
Like if nobody at this point knows who Ears is on the ranch,
You haven't been
shame
around
on
here
you.
long.
Shame
Yeah.
on you.
Well, you
Please,
might have just started. You just might have just hit your subscribe button for the first
yeah,
time. Yeah.
check our Instagram because she's in there. She's got no tail and no ears because they were frozen off as a baby calf when she was born in a snowstorm. We couldn't save them. In fact, I think Grandpa brought her into the house to
You brought her in the
save her.
house. Yeah. Yeah.
That's how cold it was. But she is essentially a giant pet and the mascot of the ranch currently. And she's a whopping what, 14, 12?
Oh, she's probably, yeah, 1250, 1300 pounds.
No,
I
I'm
call
talking about
her,
age though. She's
oh, in age. Oh no, she would be 12.
okay. So she's old for a cow.
Yeah.
Normally they only live to be about
She's,
14, 15.
yeah, she's getting up there. Yeah.
But she everybody talks about Ears. Anybody who is familiar with us, they know who Ears is and they always ask us about her. So to say that there's no emotional attachment, please go talk to Ears. She will tell you different.
if you go out there, she'll come to you,
Yeah,
looking
exactly.
for some gifts, some handouts, and some cake. But yeah, because she's kind of a pig that way. And then with her
Yeah,
ears gone, I call her pigopotamus. Well, she's she's got her own look, and she has her own fan base. By the way,
she
there's people
definitely
that are saying,
does.
"I'll take care of her. I'll give you money to keep her around." It's like, we're not going to do that. But
Maybe that's it. When we know she's about to die, we'll need to sell her off to make money for the ranch. That's what we
oh
gotta do.
God, yeah, that's tough. That's a
uh,
tough one.
anyway, that's a joke, people. She's not getting sold. The
No,
next one, the number 3 one was ranchers are uneducated and unskilled. Some of the most educated people I know never finished high school or
yeah,
they never had a college degree, yet they had extreme skills and they were extremely smart,
smart.
educated, and understood not only world situations, but how to do things every single day and do them very well. So to say to me that ranchers or farmers are uneducated and unskilled, I think is while that's a misnomer, it needs to be pushed out there more and more that those people are they are not few and far between in terms of surprising you when you think different.
Well, and if you talk to people, and they'll say, "Boy, those farmers and ranchers, those guys can do anything.
Right.
They got skills that are applicable to whatever is in front of them because we've had to.
Right.
You just can't afford to, have something done for you. You got to try to tackle it yourself and do it. And there are some cases with technology that's true. We can't necessarily do that, but for the most part, I mean, I had a neighbor down here asked me to build him something I said, "You ever weld?" He goes, "Oh, I've never welded." And I built something for him, and he was just amazed that you could, look at something and design it
Yeah.
and fit it, and it fit like a glove, and it served his purpose. And he's all tickled about it. So, I mean, you just have to. You just got to think through those things. So it's not about because you went to school and you got an education formally in a university doesn't mean you're smart, and it doesn't mean you're educated. It just
Right.
means you spent a bunch of money to get a piece of paper that says you are. And that some of the dumbest people I ever met in my life were college professors.
Right.
Had
No, I
absolutely
agree.
no worldly expertise at all. It was all academic, and the common sense, the reasoning ability was not there at all. So they
Uh,
were actually kind of fun because you could debate them and destroy them in their own class, with facts and what was real.
that also leads me to I'll go to point 7 first. So point 7, we talked about how uh things are really low key, low technology, or just ranchers and farmers don't understand technology. The misnomer is that all ranching is always low tech. That's not the
Usually,
case.
yeah.
I
It
don't.
usually is on our side, but there is stuff on the feedlot side of things that is
Right.
very high tech.
And that's my point. And in ranching, you can also throw this over to farming. Some of those tractors have so much computer systems integrated into that to say it's low tech is just absolutely ignorant.
Well, when they're using GPS to be the most efficient you can be,
Right.
it doesn't get much higher tech than that.
Right. And like you said with feedlots, knowing the counts of the head of cattle and pens,
Well,
where
and
they've been.
consumption,
Right.
weights, all of that stuff, your feeds, it's a lot of that is all computerized, automated. Yeah. So, and you got to be able to manage that.
And I think that's what's important is it goes with that the uneducated and unskilled portion, which is maybe for us a lot of stuff is low tech and we try to keep it
Mhm.
that way so it's usable and it's easy for anybody to just walk on and be able to assist us. But to say that all ranching and all farming is all low tech, it's not true. There's a lot of stuff out there that it relies on a lot of up and coming technology or well developed systems that keep things running. And frankly enough, the way the supply chain is currently in 2022, the loss of chips and the production of those chips for computers and stuff is causing and has the potential to cause significant issues with farming and ranching because of that.
Yep. No, that's right. Just because you're on a horse doesn't mean that's low tech. It is
No.
compared to being on a piece of equipment
Right.
that's got, guided by GPS or a transmission that is, super smart. Um, it is, but you know what? It's also a skill that not everybody has. So, just because it's high tech doesn't mean it's better for moving a cow. I'd rather have a horse any day than somebody running around out there on a motorcycle doing it.
Yeah, I agree.
Low stress.
Now, with the education piece, I would like to go to point 4, which is ranchers are always poor businessmen. That's another misnomer. Disagree, because I know, at least through social media specifically, a lot of ranchers specifically, not farmers, that I'm sure there's farmers out there, but a lot of ranchers who have MBAs, which are masters in business administration, something I am working towards. And so to say that they're poor businessmen, maybe they are, but it would also go back to the education piece where they're well educated in how to do business and how to work it. Um, Sometimes it's not that they're poor businessmen, it's that the process kind of sucks right now when you've got 4 meat packers that are controlling the whole situation. So when you've got a market that's being controlled outside of your control, there's very little you can do other than to make the best out of it. So to say that just simply blanket statement, ranchers are poor businessmen, that's why they've been losing for the last 4 or 5 years. That's also a misnomer and a intellectual fallacy that should be corrected.
Well, and part of that is, again, you've got somebody who does not understand
The system, the
the
issues.
entire system. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Because like I've said before, most people, when they build something or do something, they set the price because of what they've got into it, their cost, and how much they have to have out of it to make a profit. We don't
Right.
set our market price. We don't set our prices. Those are set for us. And so not necessarily in a good way. When you have monopolistic type activity going on, somebody's going to lose on one of those deals, and it's usually not the one setting the monopoly.
Right.
So having that education about what is real and what really is the factors that go into making business decisions or having a business, I think most people, we do pretty dang well for, again, selling things at wholesale, buying at retail, and doing the shipping both ways. I've challenged many other businesses to be able to make it like that and not be able to control what their final price is for their commodity when it is sold.
And to add to that, it's not just to not control it, but to guess as best as you can. We talked
Right.
about that
Yeah.
before. You're trying to time markets to the best of your ability and the best of your educated guess, really, is what it is. And you're trying to hit it the right week so that you can get the most out of your product on that week. Because the next week it could either go really high or it could go really low. And you either lost out a bunch or you made it on the high end and you're like, whoo, thank God
Right.
we made it.
We got lucky we got lucky this year. Well, and then
Yeah.
the whole point of that is that probably what I think is the biggest factor of it all is having favorable weather,
Yeah.
which you can't control.
Well, and
Not
that
many other businesses can do that and not worry about the weather.
well, and it leads to some of those prices too. We've discussed that last fall. It
Mhm.
knocked, the drought knocked weight off of our
Wait,
calves in terms of the potential. Normally they're around a certain mark, and that drought brought them down to another weight less than what we were
right.
used to, about 50 to 75 pounds less than what we're used to. So that caused issues as well, which if you want, check out the link above and we'll get you to that link. But um, the next one is also, I'm kind of going to top to bottom for some reason. I went all the way and I'm going to end up in the middle. So number 6 was large farms are always corporate farms. And I disagree with that because it's all in your perspective. A large farm may be 20 acres to you, or a large
Right.
ranch may be 20 acres. Some people, a large farm or ranch may be 36 sections, which each section is 640 acres. So you multiply that by 36 and there's your acreage. But those are not always corporate farms. Sometimes those are family run farms or ranches that happen to have workers with them and they have a very successful family business. But that does not mean they are corporate farms. That does not mean they fall under Tyson Foods or National
Right.
Beef or anything like that. They
They
are
they
their own entity and they feed within the system.
they could be incorporated, but they're still ran by the family themselves.
Right. Exactly.
There's a big difference between someone who has a board of directors that doesn't work the place
Yeah.
and the board of directors who are working the place.
Right.
That's a big difference in a corporate structure, or saying corporate farming.
Now, because we're running short on time, the last point that I'll do, number 5. So we went 1 to 9, 2 to 8, 7 to 3, 4 to 6, finishing it out at number 5. Uh, ranchers are lazy and unorganized hicks with their derby hat. That's an inside joke. The that's really, I think it's important that it's to point out that they're not, we just said all the things that was, and then maybe this is a good way to tie it all up. The bad practices that bring forth those ideas. And I even said it kind of brings out that thing that maybe these people are being lazy on the front end and it ends up not resulting in favorable actions on the back end. Well, and because of that, they're unorganized. Well, we're probably not good businessmen in that sense, like we talked about also, and all these other things, but they are typically organized. They know cows by numbers, what they've produced over the past years, what the weights of their calves are. They are educated. They work hard. They're not sitting there just hanging out watching TV all day. They are doing actionable things all day. But I think it's important to understand that they are organized and they work hard. They are not just lazy, sitting there with like Dad likes to say, a piece of straw in their mouth, just looking at cows grow and the sun go over their head throughout the day.
Yeah, I had a thought about that. It quickly left me, but it was incredibly brilliant. Some insight. When there it is, snagged it back. We're judged by in I think the society anymore a lot about appearances,
Mhm.
right? And I think that's kind of what you're alluding to. And when you take a look at a lot of people, and you're driving a 20-year-old pickup And people go, oh, man, they're driving old junk. Yeah, they just keep that stuff hanging together because they're hicks. Well, it isn't always because of that. It's because it's serviceable. It still works. And if I'm not making a payment on something,
Right.
that goes back into the business.
Right.
So, appearances are everything. Some people think just because you have a hat on that you got to be a hick,
Right.
because you don't know anything else, but it's, nothing further from the truth. I mean, there's some brilliant people in our industry, a lot of very, very smart people and hardworking people. The organization part of that, just because you think something should be look a certain way, doesn't mean that that's as highest part on the priority list at that moment. When I'm calving, the last thing I'm really looking to do is a bunch of fencing.
Yeah.
I mean, and when I'm training horses, I'm not doing something else. That horse comes first. Cattle are always first. Those animals, just taking care of them comes first. And I may not get something else done because of that. And if I don't, my priorities are right. And there's times when you can jump back and forth between things to get things hammered out, but it doesn't mean you go from A to B to C to D. You may have to go to A to D to, C to B. I mean, it just bounces around. You hit what is the priority at the time. And it's a matter of what's important, not what you think somebody should be doing.
Yeah.
Organization. I mean, you may have something like a bone pile of metal,
Scrap. Yeah.
scrap metal. That isn't junk. That is usable stuff that's being stored outside. It doesn't mean you're unorganized. It means that you're keeping stuff, because guess what? You're going to have to shine that up and weld it together for something to
Be
either
creative.
reinforce something, or you're building something, and it
Yeah.
happens all the time.
Well, that for this week is some of those misnomers that a lot of people might think about farming and ranching. We said a lot of ranching, but it does pertain to also farming on occasion. But a lot of that stems from those bad practices that we talked about, where people are, I mean, frankly, like I said, they are lazy, and they end up being the stewards of the industry towards other people outside of it that provide that appearance that we are not trying to provide. We are doing everything we can on YouTube, social media, and in person to show people that this is the right way to do it by being good caretakers of the animals of the land and provide good ethical sources of meat to people, and to make sure that everybody is safe on the front end and the back end. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dad for his last closing comments.
Well, and I think for those, if there's anybody who's watching that would like to find out and just see how lazy we are, I would challenge you to come spend some time with us, see if you can outwork us, and I guarantee you, I'll thank you till you're better paid.